lesson number 1. I am going to copy. Mistaking managing stakeholder. Oh, it doesn't even show all the text. Means pleasing them, or it's definitely not correct. We are managing stakeholders. Why do we have stakeholders? Is because you want to get their input, get their feedback. You should treat them as a source of data, not really, an absolute instructions that you need to follow through. They basically a group of customers on its own as well. So treat them as a source of data and a way you can get feedback. When you have conflict or different types of opinions, it's important to understand where they're coming from. If they're really opposed of one idea, maybe they're thinking about their own goals. So it's also important to understand what are their own personal KPIs. Is it because they care about different outcome they want to drive? So it's really important to, get down to the roots of those. Again, please share what you've learned. Love to kind of hear your stories and also mistakes that you've made. One funny thing I've also, I've done in the past when I kind of realized that I was always trying to please my stakeholders, I kind of take a different approach to the opposite way. When I first got my, product owner role, I was really trying to prove that I could do the job. Even though at that time I didn't really have direct product experience, I was feeling a little bit insecure in a sense. So, and I took a different approach, meaning that I'm not gonna budge. I'm not gonna give in to my idea or my opinion. So I was going head to head to one of the key developer lead. That didn't go well. So don't do that either. Again, it's not really about who's right or wrong. It's really just understanding where people are coming from and what they can provide. Like if they have some sort of opinion, maybe they have some information that you're not aware of. So get down to those. And basically, our main goal is really here to work on something great together and deliver value to users. So that's kind of my key lesson. Thank you, everybody. Anybody want to share about, this topic before we move on? I also love to hear your story as well. Or maybe we'll come back when you have something to share. Because lessons
are more of a question than a lesson.
Yeah.
Like when it comes to the stakeholders, if we're working on like a digital product and they're kind of the ones setting the requirements, how do you draw that line between like what they want to be done versus like not, pleasing them?
Right. That's a very, very good question, especially, the product manager coming to you as a designer, these are the requirements. How do you, differentiate those hard requirements versus, are you just doing what you're told? So I guess always dig into the why. Like, do you have information to understand why the PM created those requirements? If you do, then maybe it makes sense the way they construct it. But if there are areas that you're not so sure, like why are we working on it? Just ask question and see what the PM say. Maybe there are times that they have data that they just didn't share with you because they're also busy with the day-to-day things, or they actually don't have an answer. It was more a gut feel. So that later on, you can have that discussion as should we be talking to our customers to figure that out to reduce the risk of building something maybe people don't want? Or on the flip side, maybe the PM was saying, you will take more resources to recruit testers up front. I think it's better to test it after we build this very lightweight MVP. There's also one way of testing that. So I guess at the end of the day, just having that transparency and conversation with your PM and the team, it's kind of the best way to go. Yeah, so that's a very, very good question.
All right, thank you.
No problem. I love all of your questions. Could you ask a question? Yes, Scott, go ahead. Please ask a question.
Question would be, when would you know when to push? Would it be when you thoroughly have an understanding that you can say what you're making is accessible enough and you feel like it's going to work and solve the problem that you're trying to solve? So obviously you're going to get some sort of pushback from the developers or from the stakeholders. So at what point do you feel like you should put your foot down? Because like what you said prior, it's an adaptable period. Like, you don't always want to be forceful, but you also don't want to be too lax at the same time.
Yeah, being a designer is like always doing this. Maybe it's a bad reference, Tai Chi thing, push and pull a little bit. Um, Obviously, you don't want to be that person saying no to everything, but then you also don't want to be that person saying yes to everything. So it's really a fine line. Sometimes as a designer, you kind of have to kind of pick your battle as to identify what's the most important thing that you want to push for. Like, you're representing for the end users, right? Obviously we cannot get we cannot perfect every little usability thing, but I guess at the end of the day, like, you have to prioritize your design decision. What is that for example, top 3 things that you think are absolutely important to users? So those are the things that I will push for, because you're representing the users. And then you just basically, it all depends obviously on the resources, how open, are you really close to some sort of deadline? So those may also change how you want to push things. But if you are just at the beginning of the journey, it's always good to, keep your stakeholders in the loop, get their buy-in earlier on so that they understand why you're working on, the pieces that you work on, why you are going to the direction that you're going for. So that's also, I guess, a way to set yourself to success, pushing the team to the direction that you want.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I'm going to move on because the second lesson I've learned, it's kind of related. The second mistake I made is not have a design voice or not to have a product voice. Very related, like in meetings, I feel like, when stakeholders, obviously, most stakeholders you work with, they are the domain expert in the industry, or they maybe work there longer than you. So I'm like, ugh, when you feel like something isn't right, I back in the days, I used to kind of just kept quiet, try to take feedback in, consolidate those feedback, and basically try to draw some conclusion on the most popular feature. And I feel like that's actually a huge mistake, because usually in a design meeting, you're the only designer. So if you think about how the meeting's constructed, if we just go with ideas that have the most votes, you would never win, in a sense, because you're the only designer. And the developers and other people, they may be considering different constraints that they have. So you have to be the one who's pushing for those design decisions. And I've worked with designers where maybe they're new to the team, or they feel like they don't have the domain expertise. You can feel that they're feeling maybe a bit insecure. They don't want to push the idea too much. I feel like it's actually a lost opportunity, because without hearing those design voices, it's really hard to push, better usability for the end users, because the only person in the meeting room who's supposed to represent the users is not really speaking up. It's not really about being right or wrong. It's like voicing that design opinion so that it's a channel to educate the rest of the team. I think that's absolutely important. And I think that's also what differentiates between the junior designers versus a senior designer. Senior designers, I guess they have more experiences. They take it less personally. They're there to voice, really push. I've been in a meeting where the designer really go hard. Like, we need a secondary warning when someone closes a dialogue. That's very important. We need a warning pop up because it's a destructive action. Obviously, maybe for PM, for developers, whatever, it's just another pop up. It doesn't matter. We don't care. It's something that is something that's easily being overlooked. But then the senior designer come in and say, that's very important. Why? Because if they accidentally just close that pop-up, it has a destructive action because they're trying to delete something or remove a line item from the table, for example. We're not informing users that they're doing that. And also, we don't have an undo button. So this is basically a reversible action. So the senior designer come in, really explain how that would affect the users, and basically, after a long conversation about pop-up, then we eventually implemented a warning dialogue that we believe that, obviously it may not happen very often, but when it happens, the consequences to the user is huge, because they cannot retrieve the data that they delete anymore. So things like that here and there, like insert your design voice. You don't have to be the person who's, always right, but at least share what you're thinking. This is an opportunity to educate your team. Anybody want to share like their difficult time where like they feel like, oh, I want to share something, but I didn't feel like I can push my design voice? Anybody?
I had a question for clarification. When you say like design voice, say if I'm just a team of one, is it just if say the engineers say this can't be done, or the product management is like saying this needs to be done? Is it more just so like advocating why it can or cannot?
Okay, yeah, the audio is a little cut off, but I think you were asking, you're the only designer in your design team. So when you're working with other developers and PM, how do you navigate that space? Is that right?
Yes.
Right. So I guess having that design voice, again, you advocating for all the users. So when the PM are, creating requirements that are not in favor of considering some usability, you have to be that design voice in co-creating that requirement. Ideally, when PM are creating those requirement documents, they will get input from the team as well. So if your PM do ask to look over the requirement, this is a great opportunity for you to advocate some of the maybe missing requirements that should have been there, or you can use that as an opportunity to question how that was prioritized. As for developers, again, developers sometimes will tell you, oh, that's going to be too difficult to do, or I don't know how to do it. Again, push that, understand why did they think it's difficult. It's because they don't know how it works in terms of the user flows. I've also had experience where developers said something will take months to build, because we only provided a very high level concept. They cannot visualize how that will work. So then when you were asked to estimate, for example, I asked you, can you design Uber? It's like super vague, super broad, right? So I'm like, I'm not so sure. Or maybe I'll say, oh, it'll take a few months. So sometimes developers do that too. But if you're able to provide more tangible, user flow or some just low fidelity mockup, they have a better idea on, oh, in order to build this feature, I need to do X, Y, Z, and then they are able to provide a more accurate estimate. So at the end of the day, it's just about conversations and I guess stand by on what you believe, even though maybe the rest of the the team or the people in the meeting are having the opposite opinion. But that's natural because being a designer sometimes is lonely. You're the only designer in the meeting room. Sorry, yeah, you're a little muddy. I cannot hear you properly. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, you did. But I think someone is just unmuted and they need to be muted.
Okay, I'm gonna mute everybody again. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, I'll mute everybody. Okay, that sounds better, right? All right.
Question.
Yes, please.
I'm not a UX designer yet. I'm a student, but as I've had like group projects, I've noticed how it can be difficult when someone becomes very personally invested in an idea. And just as you said, it's important to advocate for your own idea. But as like if I, for instance, like disagree, and I really do only feel like the way someone else is defending this idea is because they've worked really hard for it and like they've spent a lot of time on it that might not benefit the project as a whole. How to like communicate in a situation like that so it doesn't hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah, that's also, I guess, a very good example in a situation maybe most of us are in. You're trying to basically kill the baby. Obviously, they're gonna have some resistance, right? But the best way I usually try to approach this type of situation is have one-on-one sessions with that person. To kind of just let them get out what's on their chest first, so that they will listen. Or else you go into a meeting they know that you're gonna visit the baby, then they're not gonna listen. So let them vent first, and then basically talk about your concern. If you have, for example, a project goal, that's why it's important to have success metric for your project, or else it's really hard to kind of say. It's kind of like you say, they say, it's pretty subjective. But if you have a objective or metrics that you want to achieve for your project, it's much easier. For example, you go in, our project goal is focusing on user sign up. We're trying to drive engagement. But, what you're working on, do you think that will help drive engagement? And then basically hear what they're saying, and then slowly push to the direction, basically to lead to the conclusion that working on this new feature is not going to help drive user sign up, because when we want people to sign up, they don't really necessarily need to use that advanced feature or whatever filtering that we are building yet. In fact, we need to make the onboarding much easier to basically navigate. So really get down to the problem, get down to metrics, make it less personal, while still acknowledging that I understand that you've worked on it for a very long time. Acknowledge their feeling, acknowledge their hard work, but basically bring it back to the project goals is the best way to go. And you may have to have multiple one-on-one sessions before with this person before you're able to basically regroup with the team and make that decision. But one-on-one meetings, like chats, it's always the best way to go, so that they feel heard, they feel acknowledged, and they understand why you're there. You're not there to go against them, but you're there to bring out the most value for your project.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
No problem. Let's see if there's anything else. Oh, like nice. My project, which one's to work on? Yeah, those are great stuff. I'm gonna move on to a different type of topic this time. How to work in a agile team, for example. So before I started, my first design job, never heard of agile, never heard of Scrum. It's shocking that we still don't really teach that in school. Maybe schools now are teaching that, I'm not aware of. But it's basically foreign concept on how designers work with the rest of the team. In school, we often just work with designers, right? There's no PM. We craft our own requirements. And there's no developer. We never really need to understand the constraint for development. I would say before I switching to product management or doing my own startup, when I had to pick up some lightweight development myself, I didn't have a lot of empathy for developers. Sometimes I feel like they just don't want to do it. That's why it creates that tension, right? So have empathy on why developers feel that way, why they push that back. Because when you change something on your design, you're basically changing the requirement, right? They have to basically rework a lot of the things that they're building. And sometimes we call our design meetings to get feedback. It's also quite, I guess, destructive into the workflow. I have to mute people again. There we go. Yeah, you want to understand where they're coming from, why they don't like meetings, how they don't like change your requirements. When you change something, you better have a good reason on why you're changing it. Because again, it's basically you are flipping their feature around, right? What they're working on, it's kind of being put on hold, or a lot of the things that they're working on is wasted. It's kind of like that baby that you kill halfway through. So understand where they're coming from. And obviously today we don't have the time to talk about what Agile is, but if you're not familiar with Agile or Scrum, like Google it. It's a pretty simple framework. So Scrum is basically a framework for people to usually software development team to work together. There's a framework on how they should work. For example, on the first day of the sprint, you use sprint, that you plan for the work for the rest of your sprint. And the sprint can go either from one week, usually 2 weeks, the more common one, 1 to 4 weeks, depending on the type of product you're working on. You may have daily sign up, and then at the end of the sprint, then you can have retrospective and also a sprint review to review the work that you've done as a team. So just understand these kind of nuggets, framework on how to work with the rest of the team was like a foreign concept to me. So that was really overwhelmed when I first was working in a more tech environment, and also understand what agile really means. There's some agile manifesto out there, for example, individuals and interaction over process and tools, things like that. Just like have a good understanding what they are, so when people talking about it, like you don't feel too left out, or you don't feel like that person who just don't know anything about it. There are tons of articles online talking about design dual tracks. Basically, when we first have Scrum or like those manifesto, design was really not, I guess, baked in into this framework yet. So a lot of the things in the framework, it didn't specify how design would fit in the puzzle. And there's new articles and like best practices on how design would fit in. So definitely take a look on those, I guess, articles. HTML. Learn HTML, CSS, please. Yeah, okay. This could be controversial one. I'm someone who has a pretty good understanding on coding. I can see the advantage of having that discussion with developers when you know how that works. It'd be interesting to hear from a designer who don't know any coding, how they navigate those conversations as well. Yes, I love this carrot, by the way. Informal follow-ups, absolutely. Yeah, all these good quotes. Learn how to work in an agile team. Okay, we got like next one. Let's see. Anything on agile? So I know agile, Scrum are pretty big topic itself. I want to throw in there so that it's on your radar already if you haven't heard about it. Okay. Lesson number 4 I've learned is actually, there we go. A B2C and B2B companies are actually very different. When I first picked my job, I didn't really put too much thought as like, oh, this is a B2B company or the size of company. I didn't really put too much thought into it. I just kind of got the first job. I think I liked the team. Like the team seems cool, and I took the job. I mean, it went fine and everything. I'm, where I am today because of those experiences. But for people who are maybe starting out, this may be something you want to consider as B2C, meaning business to customers. Business may be very different to B2B, which is business to business, meaning, for example, what's a good example? That's tons, like Salesforce. They are a business selling SaaS to other businesses, right? Versus what? Versus Yelp. Yelp's a different one. Okay, it's a special one because they're B2B2C, because they are selling to business where they can put their restaurants on Yelp and then consumer can look at it. So that might be different. Anyways, I guess the message, the learning that I want to share here is that has an impact on what kind of designer you are. Obviously, if you're in a B2C business company, then you may have more edge working in a different B2C company in the future. Although that's not a requirement or anything, it's just that if you understand how to work in navigating into a certain industry or business type, it gives you more edge. So how are two different is, I guess the key thing is, depending on the size of the company, the feedback loop might be much slower in a bigger company or in a B2B environment, because there may be more resistance in change of management. So like, are you someone who really enjoy customer interaction, like end user interaction? B2C may be better fit, but not saying that you're not going to get any customer feedback from B2B. It's just a bit different space. And also for bigger company, you may have more compliance constraints. It's just also a different environment to navigate. And at one company, I worked at a company where our clients are basically all enterprise grade client. It was really difficult to get access to customer feedback just because of the nature of the new people again. Nah, there we go. So they're very, very different. You might want to do some research on, the culture. Also, when you're in the interview, you might want to ask how teams work together. Is the design team baked in with the product team, or is there's a centralized design team and then they just distribute designers to each product team? That might be different. B2B and B2C companies may also have different launch cycle. Meaning, if you want to implement something, what's their launch cycle? Do they launch every week or do they launch every quarter? If they launch every quarter, meaning the design you've done in the previous quarter, you probably only see it live, the next quarter. And by the time you launch it, you need time to see traction and feedback. So you probably take a year for you to really measure and be able to iterate. But then usually in those companies, the reason why the cycle time is so slow is because they're a huge user base or they have a huge constraint that they have to work with. You might find it really rewarding because those may have a larger impact to people versus smaller company. Maybe their launch cycle is super short, but they may not have a huge user base. But obviously, those are not absolute answers. It's just something for you to consider that you might want to craft your career better than me, rather than just like applying to companies and take whatever job that I think the team is cool. You may want to think ahead as like your end goal is work for, what's a good one? Salesforce. You might want to kind of navigate through B2B space. If your angle is work for Google, but Google is a huge company, right? You want to work for Google Map or which product, you might also want to kind of start already planning your career as like, is there something that will be transferable to those companies? Something to think about, as I didn't do that to myself. Okay. Moving on, lesson number 5.
Oh,
yes, for delivery apps, that's a good one.
Did you have
go ahead.
before we moved on? So I guess how would you navigate the tricky one that you mentioned where it's like you're dealing with both B2C and B2B?
Yeah, what's a good example? I guess Yelp is B2B2C. Like any marketplace is usually B2B2C, meaning they have 2 types of clients. They are, for example, a market. What's a good, like Airbnb. They have. Oh, actually, that's not. I guess that's true. So the customers are also being a host in a sense. They're a business themselves, and the end consumer, people who are booking the accommodation of the end users, right? So any marketplace are usually having the B2B2C, business model. In terms of how you want to navigate it, are you thinking how to transition out to those companies or going into those companies?
More so like how to get the different forms of feedback, because I have the B2B side where there's like a service we want to sell to other business, like sell it to Salesforce. But then we also have the B2C, which is like the internal product that we distribute technologically to the users as well as the users at that business. So I have like access to the internal feedback for the B2C, but not the feedback for the B2B.
Gotcha. So are you saying you don't have access to get feedback from the B2B side?
Not at the moment.
Right. I think you kind of identify your pain point as, that's the critical thing that you're missing, which is the feedback for the business side of customers. So the first thing I'll try is, can I get in contact with those businesses? If not, why? And if there's other domain experts internally that you can talk to get those feedback. I don't know if you're a designer or PM yourself. If you're a designer, you definitely should talk to your PM to flag that as a risk, that everything we've done right now, we have not gathered any feedback from businesses. There's a huge risk, and the team should evaluate, is this a risk that we want to take as a team? Basically, kind of just building things without a quick feedback loop. We'll kind of launch and see how that goes, or do we want to mitigate some of those risks upfront with relatively pretty little resources, because you're basically just reaching out to those business and interview them, right?
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. I guess it's a related lesson that I could share on this one is also, oh yeah, go ahead. Is that a question?
I have a question. So,
Yeah.
just I'm starting out as a designer, and one who is starting out as a designer, what would you suggest, maybe to start with B2B or B2C?
Ooh, this is a very tricky question. There's definitely not definite answer because if I tell you to go to a specific industry, it may sound like I'm, pushing, for example, oh, you should go to this major in this school. It's really up to you. But the key difference I see B2B and B2C versus B2B is B2C tend to have higher expectation on usability. So they really need to take care of like the UI, the interaction, because as end users ourselves, we have pretty little patience when your app, for example, when your mobile app doesn't work. You're like, okay, I'll never come back to this application again. You're not going to give a second chance or third chance. Our patience span is pretty low when when we are using those end consumer products. Versus B2B, it's longer term. You may have longer launch cycle because they have a lot of constraint to work with, but it's a space maybe they care about the how to solve problems for the business. The business logics is more, I guess, interesting, unique than the B2C one. I've also talked to designers where it's really hard to craft UI sometimes for B2B products because why? Usually the B2B products, the business logics are quite unique to that domain. So you are not going to be able to find exact examples online or from Google or anything. So that might trigger more creative juice from your side if you like those things. Versus B2C, the onboarding, how to schedule a meeting, a lot of UI patterns are very established. In a sense, you are more of a system designer. You know how those interactions should work together. So you kind of put them together. That may have, I guess, less creative side when it comes to like baking in business logic. So I guess the short answer, it really depends on what you enjoy doing. If you haven't worked in either industry, I recommend, talk to mentors from ADPList from either industry to see to get a sense how the teams work together. But again, if you're really someone who cares about usability UI, B2C is usually better. But if you enjoy solving, harder problem, B2B might be something for you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for answering.
No problem, no problem. Kind of want to slot in any questions around different companies before we move on. Yeah, and then, there's other designers sharing great notes. Definitely take a look. I'm going to move on because I think it's kind of related. Well, they're all kind of related. It's something we're not really taught in school is I didn't really find a champion early enough when I joined a new team. I'm going to mute people again. So as we know, being a designer or sometimes being a PM is pretty lonely. We're always fighting for pushback. I need to mute again. There we go. We're always fighting for pushback. So sometimes we forget that we can find a champion earlier. So for example, you join a new company or when you are assigned to a new project, find a champion at the early stage. How do you do that? Basically, a champion is basically someone you can work with closely, someone usually advocates for your decisions, or someone you have access to when you have a question, then you can answer. This term champion usually used for like B2B customers. For example, if you're implementing, I keep going back to Salesforce, implementing Salesforce, there's one person you need to contact from the customer side, right? You're not going to just, CC the entire team. So that's your champion, the person that you contact and then work with to implement specific things. But you can still also have a champion internally for your team. So when you join a new product team, usually PM, I will recommend PM as a champion. If if for some reason your PM's busy or something else, find another champion in your team. This person should be someone you can rely on, and how once you find it, you have to start building the relationship, or just having casual coffee chats, or be curious what they are working on, what they learn. This is locked. This is not locked. Yeah, be curious what they are working on. And something I'll definitely recommend, building relationship in a team, because sometimes we're so focused on our own vertical, our line of work, we forget about people. At the end of the day, we're working with people, right? So it's important to understand what other people are working on, and just start building that relationship. So if you're joining a new company, find that champion very quickly, someone you click with. Ideally, it's your PM, because your PM is going to be the one who introduce you to other stakeholders and start building those relationship from other teams, maybe CS, maybe sales or marketing. You can learn a lot. So find your champion early. Awesome. I guess that's one more I could share with. Is there any question on champion alone? Okay, everybody seems to have a champion. It'll be interesting to know how people are finding that in this remote setting as well. I think it's also being a bit more challenging than the previous time, where we can just meet people in person and have a coffee. But yeah, find your champion. The very last thing I'll share is, this is a very long sentence. Don't call a big meeting when you don't know if whether you have buy-ins or not. So the story I want to share here is, one time I caught on a big kickoff meeting. I was really nervous. I tried to prepare as much as I could, laying out the information on our target audience, the requirements, and so forth. But I was pretty nervous because I wasn't sure how they will react. And as expected, it didn't go very well. It was scheduled as like 1.5-hour meeting, but then you extended to like 3 hours meeting, because in between there's so many questions. People didn't get some of the requirements or user flow, or they're flagging some of the things that I didn't anticipate. So that was actually a really rough meeting for me. I don't know if anyone have that experience, but if you're feeling not so confident, or you're anxious about something, usually right, just trying to identify what's making you anxious. So if I were to do that again, I will basically set up one-on-one meeting. Oh, why is the audio having echo? I will set up one-on-ones with the stakeholders beforehand to identify, what they're thinking. If they don't like my plan, then I can basically address their concern before that big meeting, or else it's sometimes a bit nerve-wracking or like embarrassing when someone basically said, no, that's not how you should work, right, in a big meeting. And it's much harder to arrive to a conclusion when there's lots of people in that meeting. So try to figure out what you don't know, and basically get buy-in before you call on meeting. Usually big meetings are horrible for, I guess big meetings are really bad for, what's the word that I want to say? It's bad for you if you want to agree on something. You should already have one-on-one conversation to your stakeholders, get their buy-in before the meeting, so that they know what's expected. And the big meeting there really is just have everyone there to relay what you've learned, and kind of summarize, this is the thing we're going to move forward, and kind of give them one last chance to flag any concerns. But it's never good if you have a new idea and this is the first time they ever heard it. 9 out of 10 times you will not go as smoothly as you wanted. Okay, that was a lot. That's kind of all the lessons that I prepared. I'm sure I've made tons of mistakes here in between, but so far, I think these are the key ones I want to share today. And I see, wow, this board is getting really beautiful. Tons of great notes. I'll consolidate them and post that somewhere and share with you. I'm hearing echo again. I'm mute you. what's it? We've got 9 minutes left. Anybody want to share their stories? Because I would love to hear them, what mistakes you've made, whether something other designers, product fellow can learn from your stories. Feel free to unmute yourself now.
I don't have a story, but I do have a question. Sorry, about finding a champion. Would you say it's like a friendship sort of relationship or more of a formal relationship? Because you said it would be ideally your product manager, but like how would you approach someone if you think that, oh yeah, this person is probably someone I could trust? Is it a friendship or is it formal?
Yeah, I mean, working with friends is always easier, right? If you think this is a champion that you can be friends with, why not? I think that's like a bonus, but I don't think that's a requirement for someone to be a champion. That they don't really need to be a friend first before they being a champion. But if they happen to be a friend and a champion is like bonus, because it'll make your life so much easier. So to your question, how to approach that, just having conversation, how you will usually get to know other designers in your team, for example. But for this champion, it's usually someone who's not from your design team, because I would say designers are usually supportive to each other, but you need buy-in from the business side, right? So that might be someone from development or someone from the product management team. Yeah, but the more friends you have, the easier life will be at work. So make friends. Again, at the end of the day, we're all humans. We want to have that emotional connections.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Constant imposter syndrome. I know it's a hard one. We have like one session dedicated into imposter syndrome. It's a real thing. Yeah. So feel free to stick around. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer. Leave your LinkedIn, connect with each other. Hopefully, I promise I'll get this blog cleaned up at one point. I want all of you to have, I guess, something tangible after attending a session rather than just, hearing me talk for like an hour. I want you to have something also. If you want to add any cool visuals in the end, add it to the board so I can include it in our blog post in the future. Yeah, cool. So feel free to drop off and move on with your day. Hope that this is useful and maybe you can practice some of these today. The best way to learn is by doing it. So maybe do some of these things. Yeah, feel free to hop off. I will stay online for another few minutes if you have any other questions. And thank you so much for contributing to the board. It's looking awesome and beautiful. And shout out to Victoria, a UX designer who helped facilitate this, I guess, the session today. Wow, I kind of put her on the spot. So great job, Victoria. Yay! Thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.